Good morning, you're watching Daybreak live on A News and I'm your host Nadia Jani, here to take you through the day's top stories. So let's take a look at the headlines. US strikes Iran and reimposes sanctions in retaliation for tanker attacks. NATO summit in Turkey enters day 2 with Ukraine defense spending and a Trump-Zelensky meeting topping the agenda. And Russia and Ukraine exchange overnight strikes while the IOC moves to ease restrictions on Russian athletes ahead of the 2028 Olympics. First this morning, a major escalation in the Gulf has heightened fears of a wider regional conflict and renewed concerns over global energy supplies. The United States carried out airstrikes against several targets in Iran on Tuesday, hours after revoking a waiver allowing the sale of Iranian oil. Tehran has accused it of breaching the ceasefire deal. Here's more.
Iran condemns the latest US strikes on Iran, calling them a violation of the Memorandum of Understanding signed with Washington last month. Iranian state media says that Qeshm Island, Bandar Abbas and Sirik were hit, with several people reportedly injured by shrapnel. Iran's parliament speaker, Mohammad Bakir Kalibaf, has accused Washington of repeatedly violating the ceasefire agreement. In a social media post, he cited the military strikes, renewed oil sanctions and threats of further attacks, saying Iran would not give in to pressure. The comments come after the United States launched major military strikes on Iran on Tuesday, accusing Tehran of attacking 3 commercial oil tankers in the Strait of Hormuz. Iran has not directly claimed responsibility. US Central Command, or CENTCOM, says American forces struck more than 80 targets, including more than 60 small boats operated by Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, along with missile launch sites and command centers. The US says the operation was intended to protect commercial shipping and impose heavy costs on those responsible for attacking vessels in international waters. The latest escalation follows Washington's decision to revoke a waiver that had temporarily eased some oil sanctions on Iran. Tehran says that move also breached last month's agreement and accused the United States of acting in bad faith. Iran's foreign ministry said Washington would be responsible for the consequences of what it called repeated breaches of the agreement. It added that Tehran would take any measures it considers necessary to protect its national interests and security. Qatar and Saudi Arabia have also condemned the attacks on the tankers, saying vessels from their countries were targeted while crossing the Strait of Hormuz, and both blamed Iran.
Now let's take a look at the stories shaping the day across the globe, and we head first over to CNN and we stick with our top story in relation to what's going on in Iran, with the US striking more than 80 Iranian targets and reimposing sanctions. Now this has happened on Tuesday, which is overnight into our Wednesday morning, where the US launched a series of powerful strikes on Iran in response to what they're saying are attacks on 3 commercial vessels in the Strait of Hormuz. Now the US Central Command said it had begun the assault to impose heavy costs for targeting and attacking commercial shipping crewed by innocent individuals in the international waterway. Now, Iran's Deputy Foreign Minister called the US attacks a violation of the US-Iran memorandum signed only last month and warned that Tehran would take decisive measures. Now, Iranian state media says strikes had hit multiple places, including Qeshm Island. No deaths have been reported, however, based on the strikes that have been sent to Iran's bases. Now, the US has said there would be consequences to what it called the wholly unacceptable attacks on tankers in general. Now, before the strikes, the US also revoked a waiver that had temporarily lifted oil sanctions on Iran, and Iran's foreign ministry called the move a breach of the memorandum and said it proved that bad faith, inconsistency and unreliability of the US government. It added that Tehran will take whatever measures it considers necessary to safeguard its national interests and national security. So we will be providing you with more information in regards to this. We do know that Iran is currently in a state of mourning with its previous supreme leader being laid to rest at the moment. So they're currently focused in on that, and did say that they did not want any form of attacks or aggressions during this time. However, we have now seen that the US has decided to, as what they're claiming, retaliate to a number of strikes on 3 vessels in the Strait of Hormuz. But we will provide you with more information as we get it. Okay, let's move over to our next story this morning, and that's on the Guardian website, and that's in relation to what's going on in France and French hard-right leader Marine Le Pen. Now, the headline reads, Marine Le Pen to run for presidency and appeal against conviction in France's highest court. Now, yesterday afternoon this broke, but it's now catching up with us this morning. Now, the leader Marine Le Pen has said that she will run for the presidency in 2027 next year and appeal to the country's highest court against embezzlement conviction that requires her to wear an electronic tag for a year. Now, she said in her words, the campaign begins tonight, is what she told French TV. Hours before Le Pen's TV appearance, a Paris appeal court actually did find her guilty of misusing 2.8 million euros in funds and in a fake job scheme, but ruled that she could stand for presidency while wearing a tag. Now, this puts an end to months of speculation that Le Pen would hand the candidacy to the 30-year-old president of her party, Jordan Bardella. Now, she said that her campaign would start immediately to begin the rebirth of France, and that she would not change her mind. So it's quite an interesting time for France, and a move to make her in the running, really, to be the next president as well, because we know that Macron's time has now come to an end, and this far-right leader may be able to get a chance in gaining a number of votes for her party. Now, let's quickly move over to the UK and what's happening there, because another far-right leader in the UK is also under scrutiny because he has recently resigned. So it says, why Farage is quitting as an MP amid scrutiny over gifts, but will he stand again? Now, the far-right leader, which you can see on your screens now, is Nigel Farage, and he's saying that he will resign as MP and stand in the subsequent by-election after facing intense scrutiny over financial support he has received. Now, the name of the party is the Reform UK Party, and he is that leader, and he said that the people of Clapton, which is a small coastal town in southern England, should be the judges of his actions, is what he's saying, which is why he's resigned, and then will re-stand, is what he's saying, to get back into position as an MP. Now, he has insisted he's done nothing wrong, but almost all opposition parties in the area and nationally are boycotting this particular by-election and have told their candidates not to stand in the by-election, which will make things quite tricky. And I don't know whether or not things can actually continue if there are no candidates for Nigel Farage to stand against. Now, Farage has been under investigation from Parliament's Standards Commissioner since May this year after not declaring a $6.6 million gift he received from a billionaire reform donor before becoming an MP. Now, opposition parties have been calling for a further probe after it emerged he did not disclose this particular support. Now, Farage said that the by-election would now give voters the chance to stick 2 fingers up at the entire establishment, is what Nigel Farage is saying. He feels that he's being victimised and that it's a political stunt, whereas his opposition, a number of opposition parties are saying he's also doing this as a stunt, and many are not going to join in. In their words, Labour described it as a circus. So we'll provide you with more information. We do know that the last by-election actually saw the resignation of Keir Starmer and the MP of the former Mayor Andy Burnham getting a seat there, and then saying that he is going to run inside the Labour Party to become the next leader, which is now the case. Okay, now let's move over to our next story this morning, and that's on Al Jazeera, and that's in relation to what took place in Damascus, because 18 wounded as explosions rock Damascus during Macron's visit to Syria. Now, we know 18 people have been injured by the 2 bomb explosions in central Damascus during the French president's visit to the Syrian government. Now, the blast happened near the Four Seasons Hotel where Macron was spending the night and was meeting social groups on the Tuesday morning. Now, the Syrian Interior Ministry said security forces detected 2 explosive devices in a parked car and a bin. Now, French officials said that Macron was safe and did not hear any of these explosions. However, shortly afterwards, he held talks with the Syrian counterpart Ahmed al-Sharaa at the presidential palace. So far, we know that no group has claimed responsibility for the attack, but a spokesman for Syria's interior ministry said that an initial lead pointing to those who are responsible had been discovered. But we will provide you with more information as we get it once they've confirmed exactly what group has caused this and whether or not there is instability in the area, which is most likely. We will also be visiting this later on in our global discussion with an expert guest to kind of dig into what this means on a larger geopolitical scale. Okay, now let's move over to our next story, and that's on the BBC website in relation to West Africa, because Ghana has decided to halt visit by South African president amid row over anti-migrant protests. Now, previously before, in a number of weeks ago, I did highlight the protests that were taking place in South Africa, as they were very upset with a number of migrants heading into the country. Now, Ghana has a relationship with South Africa and has now decided to postpone a visit by South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa because of the xenophobic rallies that resulted in hundreds of Ghanaians being repatriated from the country. Now, Ramaphosa has a long-planned visit to Ghana in the first week of August, and it had been hoped that this would actually help to de-escalate tensions between the two nations. But many in Ghana actually feared that his presence would lead to mass protests inside the country. So on Tuesday, the government said that the visit would not happen for the time being, and in a statement actually stated that we sent them a communication, them is South Africa, indicating that it would be best to defer the visit in view of the present climate around xenophobia, is what was explained. Now, South Africa, we know, is facing big political backlash for its treatment of African nationals coming from the citizens there, who feel that a number of African migrants are taking their jobs, and it's something that they are not tolerating and are also pressing the government to do something about that. But in the meantime, many citizens in South Africa has decided to take things into their own hands, and in some cases forcing a number of African nationals to leave the country and head back home. But we will provide you with more information, because it will be interesting to find out if other countries also follow the same route that Ghana is also following, just to see if tensions die down a little bit more. Okay, now let's move to our next story, and that's some video footage which is also on the BBC because of a tornado which hit central Chinese cities, and it's quite rare. So let's just take a look at this video coming on your screens. There we are. And with this, at least 11 people have died after severe thunderstorms swept cities in central China's Hubei province. Now, a student in the city told the BBC that it had thought it was just an ordinary thunderstorm until he saw things started to fly through the air outside his dormitory window. So these scenes are quite drastic. It looks like a movie, if anything. But the storms have damaged thousands of buildings and injured more than 300 residents, is what local authorities say, and now they have launched rescue and relief operations in the city. Okay, now let's move over to the thing that everybody is talking about. We can't run away from it. It is the World Cup. Let's go to the New York Times to see some of that information coming up on your screen. It's not many teams were playing overnight, but we do have this because Switzerland knocked out Colombia on penalties to reach the World Cup quarter-finals, as well as Egypt also played against Argentina and lost 3-2. Egypt's manager has vowed not to watch another minute of the World Cup after feeling that his side suffered an injustice against Argentina, as Lionel Messi inspired a miraculous comeback from the 2 goals. And I will bring you some more information on that later on in the programme. But that's it for now. That's your morning press headlines. Now we're going to take a short break, and when I return, I'll discuss the rest of the global stories. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. You're watching Daybreak. Now let's take a look at the global stories. And we head first over to France, where French far-right leader Marine Le Pen has announced she will stand in the 2027 presidential election after an appeals court reduced her ban on holding public office. The court upheld her conviction for misusing European Parliament funds, but shortened the ban, allowing her to run. Le Pen, who has unsuccessfully contested the presidency 3 times, also said she would appeal the ruling to France's highest court. Her decision comes as her National Rally party leads opinion polls ahead of next year's election. Now, the NATO gathering in Turkey enters its second day, with leaders expected to focus on Ukraine, defense spending, and talks between US President Donald Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Let's take a look at what day one had to bring.
The first day of the NATO summit in Ankara was dominated by major defence announcements, as allies sought to demonstrate they are increasing military spending and strengthening Europe's security. Leaders unveiled arms agreements worth tens of billions of dollars and launched new projects aimed at improving the alliance's military capabilities, particularly against the growing threat from drones. Speaking at a defence industry forum, NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte announced the new Drone Edge initiative, saying allies will invest more than $40 billion over the next 5 years to expand drone technology and improve protection against aerial threats.
We are building robust counter-drone defenses to detect, identify and neutralize drones. That's how we protect our 1 billion people against the full range of drone threats. And today, we are launching the NATO Drone Edge initiative. Through this initiative, allies are investing over $40 billion in counter-drone capabilities over the next 5 years.
Ukraine remained high on the summit agenda. President Volodymyr Zelensky urged European partners to accelerate the development of their own anti-ballistic missile systems, warning that existing production cannot meet growing demand as Russia continues its missile attacks.
And I believe Europe urgently needs its own capability to produce anti-ballistic systems and the missiles they require. We all value the Patriot system. It's an excellent system, and there are others as well, but today's wars have shown that current Patriot production is not enough to meet the growing demand for protection against ballistic missiles. That is a fact.
US President Donald Trump also attended the opening day, saying he spoke with both Russian President Vladimir Putin and President Zelensky before the summit. He expressed hope that renewed diplomatic efforts could help bring an end to the war in Ukraine.
I think they both want to make a deal. It's too bad it took so long, but I think there's going to be something's going to come out, and the president's also helping us with that. But I think there's something. You know, I settled 8 wars, and I think we're going to be settling a 9th.
The summit now moves into its second day, when Trump and Zelensky are expected to meet on the sidelines. NATO leaders are also due to continue discussions on long-term support for Ukraine, higher defence spending and strengthening the alliance's military readiness.
Still staying on the summit, and a key moment that was announced during that time was to lift sanctions on Turkey after US President Donald Trump met President Recep Tayyip Erdogan on the sidelines. Now, the sanctions were imposed in 2020 after Ankara purchased Russian S-400 air defense systems, leading to its removal from the F-35 fighter jet program. Trump also said a decision on a possible 5 F-35 sale to Turkey would be made, with trade expected to feature in the talks. Speaking before the meeting, Trump explained why he believes the sanctions should be lifted.
So we're going to be taking the sanctions off. Okay? I don't want him to waste his time answering that question, because we're working very closely with Marco Rubio, a very famous man, great Secretary of State, and with Scott Bessent, and with Pete and everybody else. We're going to be taking the sanctions off. It's time to do that. Okay? We don't want to sanction friends. It's very simple.
Now, Finland says the alliance has changed significantly since it joined 3 years ago following Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Its defense minister told A News why Helsinki believes those changes are strengthening the security of frontline member states.
Well, Finnish perspective, we think that if NATO is strong, Finland's security is strong. So that's why we joined to this NATO. We thought 70 years, we thought that we can manage by ourselves with strong national defense and the highest will to defend country in Europe. 82% of the Finns are ready to defend our country. And we have almost 1 million reservists in Finland and a lot of high-end capabilities and firepower. But still, we joined NATO 3 years ago. 3 years ago, NATO was totally different than today. 3 years ago in Vilna summit, it was totally different, and now we are transforming NATO in totally different, and everyone are taking defense seriously and purchasing different equipments and developing troops and taking seriously. So we're really happy as a frontline country.
And from Finland Defence Minister to Roketsan, a Turkish weapons manufacturer who is hoping to expand its role as a supplier of military technology and equipment. Its chief executive gave his assessment of the opportunities for Turkey in the alliance to A News.
Turkish defense industry is advancing very fast. Right now we have a very big capacity for manufacturing most of the industry products. And NATO members is right now seeking for a solution for the defense products because of the capacity, because of the technological level. Turkish defense industry is creating a lot of know-how, technology, and the battlefield proven products. So this creates a big actually potential for cooperation.
Now to the war in Ukraine, which is continuing with more missile attacks launched by Russia, which has killed at least 22 people and exposed widening gaps in the country's air defences. Emergency crews continued searching through the rubble of residential high-rises. Ukraine says the assault included hundreds of drones and dozens of missiles, with ballistic missiles exposing a growing shortage of US-made Patriot air defence interceptors. According to authorities, Kyiv has responded by targeting Russia's fuel supply routes to occupied Crimea. Now to how people in Kyiv are going through, with many having to make tough decisions beyond the physical damage and seeking some form of stability in their lives. Here's more.
Residents in Kyiv are deciding whether to stay in the Ukrainian capital after a deadly Russian missile and drone attack destroyed part of a residential apartment block. On Tuesday, residents living near the damaged building said they faced a difficult choice between staying in Kyiv or leaving their homes, comparing daily life to playing Russian roulette.
So what are we going to do? What options do we have? There are options to leave the country, but for me, those aren't options. Our country is our country. I don't know. We'll see what happens. Russian roulette, or whatever they call it. That's how we're living right now.
Even today I was talking to my son that it would be nice to move to somewhere out of Kyiv, at least to some village. But I'm tied to my job, to my work. I haven't got an online job.
The attack was part of a wider wave of Russian missile and drone strikes on Monday that killed at least 28 people across Kyiv and the surrounding region, according to Ukrainian officials. Ukraine's military says it was unable to intercept any of the 23 ballistic missiles launched during Monday's assault, highlighting growing concerns about the country's air defenses. Elsewhere, speaking at the NATO Defense Industry Forum during the NATO summit in Ankara, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky called on European allies to accelerate the development of a homegrown anti-ballistic missile system.
Now, the International Olympic Committee has provisionally lifted its suspension of the Russian Olympic Committee on Tuesday. The move marks a significant step forward towards Russia's reintegration ahead of the Los Angeles 2028 Games.
Russia's athletes could soon be back in international competitions, including the Olympic qualifiers in Los Angeles in 2028. It's after the International Olympic Committee provisionally lifted the suspension of the Russian Olympic Committee. The ROC had been suspended since October 2023 after incorporating sports bodies from Russian-controlled regions of Ukraine. The IOC says that issue has now been resolved, but no decision has been made on whether Russia's flag, anthem or colours can be used at the Games. Restrictions on Russian state officials and on holding IOC events in Russia also remain in place. IOC President Kirsty Coventry says the decision is aimed at giving athletes a path back to the Olympics.
We wanted to ensure all athletes have the possibility to compete at the Olympic Games and not be held responsible for their government's actions. And I believe that this is what this decision speaks to. It allows for Russian athletes to take part in sport competitions, but we've also been very clear that we do not condone any violence and war around the world, and we will continue with that stance.
The IOC says international federations will decide how to move forward in their own competitions. Coventry said anti-doping safeguards will remain important before Russian athletes return to major events. However, Ukraine's foreign ministry criticised the decision, saying it sends a deeply concerning signal while Moscow continues its war. It called on governments hosting international sporting events and sports federations not to allow Russian state symbols at competitions.
Now, the United States, Japan and South Korea have signed a trilateral agreement in Ankara to speed up the use of small modular nuclear reactors in partner countries. The US has pledged more than $10 million to support safe SMR deployment in the region. Washington says the cooperation supports energy security and wider security interests, while also promoting nuclear safety standards. The deal was signed on the sidelines of the NATO summit in Turkey and will initially focus on the Indo-Pacific. China and Russia have launched their latest joint naval exercise. Joint Sea 2026 is what it's called, off China's eastern coast. The move highlights the continued expansion of military cooperation between the two countries. Both Beijing and Moscow insist the drills are defensive in nature and not directed at any third party. However, the drills come amid heightened geopolitical tensions in the Indo-Pacific. Our correspondent Manur Maktoum has more.
China and Russia officially started the Joint Sea 2026 naval exercise in waters and airspace near Qingdao in eastern China's Shandong province. The week-long drills involve a warship, submarines, naval aviation, and support vessels from both countries, with participating forces conducting joint command operations, maritime defense, anti-submarine warfare, search and rescue, and coordinated maneuvers at sea. China's Ministry of National Defense said that the exercise is part of the annual military cooperation plan agreed by both countries and is aimed at strengthening strategic coordination, enhancing joint operational capabilities, and contributing to regional peace and stability. Russia has similarly stated that the drills are not directed against any third country, with the Kremlin describing them as routine military cooperation between strategic partners. Beijing and Moscow have steadily deepened their military cooperation over the past 2 decades. The two countries have held irregular joint sea naval exercises since 2012, expanding their scope from coastal defense to long-range operations involving the Pacific, Mediterranean, Baltic, and Sea of Japan. Although China and Russia do not maintain a formal military alliance, both governments describe their relationship as a comprehensive strategic partnership of coordination for a new era. Both emphasize that their partnership is based on non-alignment and is not targeted at any specific country. However, their defense cooperation has intensified since the deterioration of both countries' relations with the United States and its allies. Manu Maktoum, A-News, Beijing.
Back over to the Middle East, and thousands of Iraqis have gathered in the holy city of Najaf to mourn Iran's late supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. His coffin has arrived from Iran on Tuesday and was received by Iraqi Prime Minister Ali al-Zadi, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian, and senior officials. Crowds surrounded the coffin, with many reaching out to touch it and throwing items towards it in a symbolic gesture of devotion and to seek blessings. Najaf, the burial place of Imam Ali, is one of the Shiite Islam's holiest cities, making it a significant location for the funeral ceremonies. Now to South America, and the United Nations aid chief Tom Fletcher has arrived in Venezuela for a 4-day visit following the devastating earthquakes that struck the country nearly 2 weeks ago. During his trip, he will assess humanitarian needs and meet survivors, aid workers and government officials. The World Food Programme says it plans to provide food assistance to 500,000 people affected by the disaster, while UN says Venezuela's 2026 humanitarian appeal has risen from $150 million to $300 million since the quakes. Now to Central Africa, and health officials in the Democratic Republic of Congo have opened a second Ebola treatment center in the eastern province of North Kivu to ease pressure on an overwhelmed facility. The development comes as the disease continues to spread in the region. Our correspondent has more.
The new Ebola treatment center was opened in the city of Beni in the east of the Democratic Republic of Congo. It's a 20-bed facility that will provide specialized care for patients. Authorities opened the center to ease pressure on the other health facility in the conflict-affected region. Attacks by rebels of the Allied Democratic Forces have left dozens of civilians dead and forced hundreds to flee their homes since the beginning of this year. The insecurity has hampered health workers' efforts to trace and isolate suspected Ebola patients, leading to the continued spread of cases in the provinces of Ituri, North Kivu, and South Kivu. The DRC government recently said it reinforced security in the region to ensure health workers carry out their work safely. Experts have also begun clinical trials of 2 drugs aimed at reducing deaths among patients infected with the Bundibuja strain of Ebola. The latest Ebola outbreak is the 17th to occur in the DRC since 1976. Chris Ochamringa for A News in Kinshasa.
Now to a quick break. When I return, I'll discuss the rest of the key regional headlines, and I'll be joined by a guest to dig into some of those stories. Make sure you stay with me.
On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption.
We are in Seoul, the Republic of Korea, a country that for more than 70 years has lived in the shadow of unfinished war.
I was 18 years old when the Korean War broke out. My 2 brothers were dragged out to the front yard of the village public hall and forcibly subjected to a trial under the name of People's Trial.
The military demarcation line, created after the Korean War, became a massive wall, preventing separated families from meeting.
Less than a kilometer away lies North Korea.
지금 우리 무장력은 그 어떤 위기에도 대응할 철저한 준비가 되어 있으며
Подписанный сегодня договор предусматривает в том числе оказание взаимной помощи в случае агрессии против одного из участников.
The Russian-Ukraine war now is connected with North Korean participation in the Russian army.
The complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula is the only outcome that we will find acceptable.
If the U.S. persists in such hostile policy towards the DPRK, there will never be denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula.
Welcome back and thank you for joining me this morning. Now let's turn to the region and we head over to Armenia, and its relations between Russia are entering a new phase following a period of heightened tensions over security, regional policy and Yerevan's increasingly diversified foreign relations. Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan's visit to Yekaterinburg signals an effort by both sides to stabilize dialogue and address outstanding issues while preserving their long-standing strategic ties. Joining me now is Ulvia Zulfikar, political analyst in Baku, to go into more detail about this top story. Okay. Thank you for joining me.
Hello, thank you for inviting me.
My first question to this is Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan has said Armenia hopes to resolve the problematic issues in its relationship with Russia. What are the principal sources of tensions between the two, and what progress is realistically achievable through this visit?
I think this visit should primarily be viewed as an attempt to reduce tensions rather than fully restore relations. The disagreements between Moscow and Armenia have accumulated over several years and concern both political and economic issues. Armenia has increasingly diversified its foreign policy, while Russia has sought to preserve its traditional influence in the South Caucasus. So, in my view, neither side expects a breakthrough. The realistic objective could be to
Hello, Ms. Zulfikar, can you hear me?
In the economic sphere, I think that alone would already be a meaningful result. But I think for short and mid-term, fully recovered relations don't seem realistic.
I see. So what factors then have driven a wedge between the two countries, and what incentives do both governments have to improve the bilateral ties? As you mentioned, it's taken a number of years to get to this stage. So what are the incentives that both governments can actually yield upon?
In my opinion, the deterioration stems from changing geopolitical priorities on both sides. Armenia has been pursuing a more diversified foreign policy, expanding engagement with the European institutes and other international partners. Russia, meanwhile, reassessing its regional priorities under the pressure of broader geopolitical developments. So despite these differences, Russia remains one of Armenia's largest economic partners, while Moscow also still has an interest in maintaining relations with neighboring country that remains important for him for regional logistics, trade and economic cooperation, especially when Russia is under sanctions.
Now, if we look at the economy, what are the key issues surrounding trade, investment and business cooperation? And why has Russia emphasized the need for favorable conditions for investors?
I think economics has become the most particular area where both sides can still find common ground. So Russia's emphasis on creating favorable conditions for investors reflects its intention to have long-term economic influence in Armenia. At the same time, Armenia is still interested in maintaining access to the Russian markets, especially when there are still Armenian people trading in Russia and bringing benefit to Armenian economy. So therefore, I believe economic cooperation may become the first area where confidence may seem to recover, even if political disagreements remain.
And how are changing regional dynamics and Armenia's evolving foreign policy reshaping its security relationship with Russia in that regards?
I think Armenia is pursuing a more multi-vector foreign policy than in previous years. So it's seeking to diversify its international partnerships while maintaining dialogue with Russia. And this is a broader trend in international relations, where many medium-sized states aim to avoid excessive dependence on any single power center. So therefore, I do not expect Armenia to abandon dialogue with Russia, but rather to continue pursuing a more balanced foreign policy that provides diplomatic flexibility.
And how do developments then in Armenia-Russia relations affect the wider geopolitical landscape of the South Caucasus? You know, if we include regional connectivity, energy and security, what implications does that have?
I believe developments between Moscow and Yerevan influence the geopolitical environment of the South Caucasus because they affect the regional balance of interests among major powers. Today, the region is shaped not only by Russia-Armenia relations, but also by broader processes, including regional connectivity, projects, evolving transport corridors, and growing economic integration, and the normalization agenda between regional actors as Azerbaijan and Armenia. So in the context, constructive dialogue between Armenia and Russia contributes to greater regional predictability, but it is no longer the only factor determining the geopolitical landscape. However, there is a country as Azerbaijan which successfully keeps the balance between regional actors and global powers. And this point itself keeps the situation more balanced in the region.
And what outcomes would represent a successful visit for both the Prime Minister Pashinyan and Russian leadership there? And what are the signals observers should look for in assessing whether the relations are genuinely improving?
I think success should not be measured by political declarations, statements alone. The real indicators will practical outcomes. So if we see progress in removing trade barriers, expanding economic cooperation, increasing official contacts, and reducing political rhetorics, that would suggest the visit produced tangible results. In other words, the implementation of concrete decisions will matter far more than statements following this.
And also, with all of this, Armenia has not hidden the fact that it also wants to reposition itself closer to Europe with a number of European talks that's been having, and even Ursula von der Leyen visiting Armenia last week. If Armenia continues to wanting to share its resources and provide more political kind of advancements with the EU, will Russia push Armenia to wanting to make it a decision whether or not to stay with Russia or to go with the EU? Because it's unlikely that Armenia will be able to have both sides working together, or do you think that's a possibility?
Yes, it is possible, because for Armenia, it has to choose one of the sides, or European countries, European institutes, or Russia. So choosing both sides, it's impossible right now for Armenia, because it already has the side of Western countries, and the tension between Armenia and Russia, that's why there is a tension between Armenia and Russia right now. So I think if to choose, Pashinyan will bend to countries, institutes, and even United States, rather than Russia. And rebuilding trust between Russia and Armenia could be a gradual process, because trust in international relations is based on long-term consistency rather than individual meetings. And even if current tensions are reduced, differences in foreign policy priorities and geopolitical perceptions are likely to remain. Therefore, I believe the relationship is entering a new phase between Russia and Armenia, and not necessarily one based on strategic alignment, but on cooperation where both sides engage, where their interests coincide. To my opinion, this is probably the most realistic scenario for Armenia and Russia in the foreseeable future.
Yes, it'd be quite interesting how that looks later on down the line. And if we just look ahead to what the prospects are for rebuilding strategic trust between Armenia and Russia, and what challenges are likely to remain, even if short-term tensions are eased, what does that pose?
I think tension is still the relations between Armenia and Western countries. For example, Russia would never want Western countries to be so close to its south line, I mean Armenia, And that's why Russia will try to keep Western countries away from Armenia and holding its economy and still in its hands. So that's why I think still for even if short-term and mid-term relations will be built, for long-term there is still Western countries. The relationship between Western countries and Armenia is a threat for Russia, as Russia sees it as a threat. So that's why I think yes, still for long term, Russia will try to keep Western powers away from Armenia, but Armenia likely not to keep them away because it doesn't want to be the forepost of Russia as it was before.
I see. Wow, very interesting times for both these two nations. Thank you so much, Ms. Zulfikar, for coming onto the program and explaining that. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me. Have a good day.
Right, now to the NATO summit. And speaking to journalists on the sidelines, Turkish Vice President said that the South Caucasus remains a key topic on the regional agenda. Here's what he had to say.
A wide range of issues will certainly be discussed, regional, global and bilateral. The South Caucasus is especially important. As you know, tensions between Armenia and Azerbaijan have been significantly reduced. We are now at a point very close to peace. At the same time, there is the issue of opening the Zangezur corridor. This would strengthen connectivity between Turkey and Central Asia, and in turn, reinforce the middle corridor stretching from China to Europe. This is something we all want. As Turkey, we are making a great effort to achieve both a lasting peace and full normalization of relations between Turkey and Armenia.
Now, Pakistan and Kyrgyzstan look to set to strengthen their relationship in trade, energy and regional connectivity with Central Asia. Pakistan's President Asif Ali Zardari is on an official visit to Kyrgyzstan, the first by a Pakistani president in 21 years. Our correspondent Mariam Zia reports from Islamabad.
Pakistan's President Asif Ali Zardari arrived in Kyrgyzstan on Monday for a 4-day official visit, the first by a Pakistani president since 2005. The trip follows Kyrgyz President Sadr Japarov's trip to Pakistan last December, when the two countries signed 15 agreements and agreed to increase bilateral trade to $200 million by the year 2007 to 2008. Pakistan's foreign ministry says the leaders will review the full spectrum of bilateral relations and exchange views on regional and international developments. Their talks are expected to focus on trade, investment, energy, mining, agriculture, digital economy, and regional connectivity. The agenda also includes the $1.2 billion Khasa 1000 electricity project, which aims to transmit surplus hydropower from Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan to Pakistan through Afghanistan. The project has faced years of delays because of instability in Afghanistan. This visit reflects Pakistan's broader push to deepen economic engagement with Central Asia through trade, energy cooperation, and regional connectivity. Mariam Zia, A News, Islamabad.
Uzbekistan is bringing together religious leaders, scholars and policymakers for the first International Forum on Islamic Civilization. The event aims to promote the values of peace, tolerance and enlightenment while strengthening international cooperation in preserving the Islamic world's scientific and cultural heritage. Our correspondent Sevil Rajapova reports from Tashkent.
More than 300 delegates from across the Muslim world have gathered in Uzbekistan for the first International Forum on Islamic Civilization. The forum brings together ministers, muftis, leading scholars and representatives of international organizations, including ISESCO and the Muslim World League, to discuss research, education, monastery preservation and the digital future of Islamic heritage. Held in Tashkent, Samarkand and Termez, the 5-day forum focuses on strengthening collaboration in preserving Islamic scientific and cultural heritage, while promoting the authentic values of Islam based on peace, tolerance and enlightenment.
This forum gathered many scholars from different countries, and the most important is the topic of this forum, It indicates how important Islamic civilization and how can, if we put our hands together, we can bring back our Islamic civilization, our Islamic legacy, which started, and I think Uzbekistan could initiate based on the initiative from His Excellency President Shaukat Mirziyoyev.
Beyond the discussions, the forum will feature a series of landmark scientific and cultural initiatives, including the launch of the Scientific Atlas of Islamic Civilization, an AI-powered model designed to decipher centuries-old Arabic manuscripts, as well as digital museum projects and new publications aimed at preserving and promoting Islamic scholarly heritage for future generations.
Abu Ali ibn Sina was the teacher of Europe for centuries. His ideas shaped learning and scholarship for generations. Today, we need to restore these traditions. We should sign agreements between countries, invite teachers, send our own students abroad, including to Russia, and continue exchanging knowledge. That is how people can come together once again.
The forum is expected to conclude with the adoption of the Tashkent Declaration, alongside new cooperation agreements and a roadmap for developing the Center for Islamic Civilization through 2030, reinforcing Uzbekistan's ambition to become a global hub for research, dialogue, and the preservation of Islamic heritage. It is Yulia Rajab reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A News.
It's now time for a break, but when I return, I'll have a full update on the latest headlines, plus a look at what's making the front pages this morning. Make sure you stay with me. Don't go anywhere. Hello and welcome. You're watching Daybreak live on A News, and I'm your host, Nadia Jani, here to take you through the day's top stories. So let's take a look at the headlines. US strikes Iran and reimposes sanctions in retaliation for tanker air attacks. NATO summit in Turkey enters day 2 with Ukraine defense spending and a Trump-Zelensky meeting topping the agenda. And Russia and Ukraine exchange overnight strikes while the IOC moves to ease restrictions on Russian athletes ahead of the 2028 Olympics. Now let's go to the headlines making its way around the globe and over this morning, because we head first over to the Guardian website and what's taking place in France, which the news broke over the weekend. But we're now catching up because Marine Le Pen to run for presidency and appeal against conviction in France's highest court. Now we do know that she has decided to run and has made sure that she's actually going to appeal to the country's highest court against the embezzlement conviction that actually requires her to wear an electric tag as well. So in her statement, she said the campaign begins tonight, is what she told French TV in a combative primetime interview. Now, hours before that, Le Pen's TV appearance, Paris appeal court found her guilty of misusing 2.8 million euros in funds in a fake job scheme, but ruled she could stand for presidency while wearing a tag. Now, the decision is a remarkable political gamble for her, and it puts an end to months of speculation that Le Pen would hand the candidacy to the 30-year-old president of her party, Jordan Bardella. Now, she said that her campaign would start immediately to begin the rebirth of France and that she would not change her mind on this. So it's quite interesting, the take that's happening, because now she's able to run for presidency, and Macron, whose time is coming to an end, will be stepping aside. So there will definitely be a new president in France from next year. We just don't know who that will be, but now we do know that Marine Le Pen will be one of those running for that top seat. Now let's quickly move over to the UK, because we have another far-right leader in the UK, Nigel Farage, who has decided to resign as an MP. The headline reads, Labour Tories, Lib Dems refuse to stand in by-election with Farage's resignation labelled a desperate stunt as it happens. So just to give you an overview, Nigel Farage has decided to resign as an MP and stand in a subsequent by-election after he faced intense scrutiny over financial support he had received. Now, the Reform UK leader said that the people of Clacton, which is the area he represents, a small coastal town in South England, will be the ones to decide and of his actions, is what he's saying, and insisted that he had done nothing wrong. However, the Conservatives and a number of opposition parties have decided to boycott the elections. Now, Farage has been under investigation from Parliament Standards Commissioner since May after not declaring a $6.6 million gift he received from a billionaire reform donor before he became MP. Now, opposition parties are calling for a probe after it emerged that he did not disclose support of this particular financial gain. Now, a by-election would give voters, what he's saying, what Nigel Farage is saying, a chance to stick up two fingers against the establishment. However, many in government are saying that this is a tactical demonstration and a circus is what Labour has described it as, which is why they're not putting any candidates forward in this by-election. Okay. Now let's move over to our next story this morning, which is on the BBC website, and some footage of a tornado, a rare tornado, which lashes central Chinese cities. So if we just play that video just to see exactly the extremities of what this actually did, because 11 people have died after this severe thunderstorm swept cities in central China's Hubei province. As you can see on your screens just coming up there, that thick thunder cloud making its way around parts of the city. Now, the tornado videos have been circulating online, taking from neighbouring cities of Izu and Hungai. Now, a student has said that he thought it wasn't anything extraordinary until he saw things starting flying through the air outside his dormitory. And the storms have now damaged thousands of buildings and injured more than 300 residents, is what local authorities have said. And they've now launched rescue and relief operations in the area. Okay. Now let's move over to something that everyone's talking about, that's the World Cup, and whether or not you love it, like it or loathe it, we cannot get away from it. So on the New York Times, because Switzerland played Colombia this morning and Switzerland hold nerve in penalty shootout to sink Colombia and reach World Cup quarter finals. So Switzerland has been able to knock out Colombia on penalties, which isn't always something that any team wants. You want to win it, as some will say, fair and square within the match. However, because no one did score, it always moves over to extra time and penalties. Now Switzerland are able to enter the quarterfinals and play another team which will be announced shortly. Now, on top of that, Egypt also played Argentina and unfortunately lost 3-2. Now, Egypt's manager is calling it quite controversial and said that he's now vowing not to watch another minute of the World Cup. And if we go to, I don't know if we have that link, but Egypt is saying that Egypt's manager is saying, oh, here we are, is saying Egypt fumes as injustice and make messy favoritism claims after exit. Now, we do know that Argentina has a large football fans from a number of different parts of the world, but it's something that Egypt's manager has said that there's been a lot of criticism in relation to this game, and he has now vowed not to watch another minute of the World Cup after feeling that his side suffered an injustice against Argentina as Lionel Messi inspired a miraculous comeback from 2 goals down. So it's quite interesting right now. Egypt did play a very good game. However, Argentina was able to win the game with 3-2, but I'll be able to provide you with more information later on in the programme, so make sure you stay tuned. But the World Cup is offering a number of controversies that we've seen throughout, and it's only Wednesday, that we've seen throughout this week and previous weeks as well. But let's see how far these teams go as they now enter into the quarterfinals. Okay, now let's move over to our next story this morning, our leading story, and that's on the New York Times, because the US strikes Iran and reimposes sanctions in retaliation for tanker attacks. Now, the US has launched a series of powerful strikes on Iran because it said that it hit 3 commercial vessels in the Strait of Hormuz, and the US Central Command said it had begun to impose heavy costs for targeting and attacking commercial shipping crewed by innocent individuals in the international waterway. Now, Iran's deputy foreign minister called the US attacks a violation of the US-Iran memorandum signed last month and warned that Tehran would take decisive measures in relation to that. Now, Iranian state media says strikes had hit its Qeshm Island as well as Bandar Abbas and Sirik, where people have been injured, but no fatalities have been reported in relation to that. They also added that Tehran will take whatever measures it considers necessary to safeguard its national interests and national security. But let's now go into this report that provides us with more detail into what these attacks really mean between the two countries, especially with a looming 60-day ceasefire currently in situation. Here we go.
Iran condemns the latest US strikes on Iran, calling them a violation of the Memorandum of Understanding signed with Washington last month. Iranian state media says that Qeshm Island, Bandar Abbas and Sirik were hit, with several people reportedly injured by shrapnel. Iran's parliament speaker, Mohammad Bakr Kalibaf, has accused Washington of repeatedly violating the ceasefire agreement. In a social media post, he cited the military strikes, renewed oil sanctions and threats of further attacks, saying Iran would not give in to pressure. The comments come after the United States launched major military strikes on Iran on Tuesday, accusing Tehran of attacking 3 commercial oil tankers in the Strait of Hormuz. Iran has not directly claimed responsibility. US Central Command, or CENTCOM, says American forces struck more than 80 targets, including more than 60 small boats operated by Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, along with missile launch sites and command centers. The US says the operation was intended to protect commercial shipping and impose heavy costs on those responsible for attacking vessels in international waters. The latest escalation follows Washington's decision to revoke a waiver that had temporarily eased some oil sanctions on Iran. Tehran says that move also breached last month's agreement and accused the United States of acting in bad faith. Iran's foreign ministry said Washington would be responsible for the consequences of what it called repeated breaches of the agreement. It added that Tehran would take any measures it considers necessary to protect its national interests and security. Qatar and Saudi Arabia have also condemned the attacks on the tankers, saying vessels from their countries were targeted while crossing the Strait of Hormuz, and both blamed Iran.
2 bombs have exploded in Syria's capital on Tuesday. It happened near a hotel where French President Emmanuel Macron is staying during his visit there. The explosion struck a busy area between the Syrian Tourism Ministry and the National Museum. 18 people were wounded, including 4 police officers and Syria's Deputy Tourism Minister. No one has yet claimed responsibility. The first blast hit soon after Macron's motorcade left the presidential palace, but he continued his visit and 2 sides signed deals in the areas of aviation, health and trade. The recent explosions in Damascus, which came as French President Macron was visiting Syria, have put a spotlight back on the country's fragile security situation and raised fresh questions about what comes next. Now, joining me now is Associate Professor at the University of Ankara, Turkey, to help break down these developments.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you so much for joining me today. Now, my first question in this is, how should the Damascus explosions be interpreted in the context of Syria's post-Assad transition, and what do they reveal about the country's actual security landscape?
Actually, as you know, Syria suffered a civil war for almost 14 years, with very different groups fighting each other, the regime, the Kurdish separatists, various Islamists, etc. So it's surely inevitable if some isolated bomb attacks happen, especially in the context of the visit of an important leader like Emmanuel Macron yesterday. So far as nobody among the Syrian leaders, etc., has been killed, it should not be considered a major risk for internal safety in Syria.
I see. And to what extent then was the timing of these explosions intended to send some form of geopolitical message, and who stands to benefit from disrupting Syria's diplomatic reintegration?
or many people takes profit in that. Iran takes profit in that. Russia takes profit in that. Other actors still take profit in that. So far, we must be very cautious, very prudent on determining who is behind this bombing. We have to wait for the results of the investigation.
And who do you think is likely to put their hands up to this particular attack of the explosions there?
Can you repeat, please?
Who is likely to state that they're responsible for this particular bombing?
For the moment, we don't have enough element to determine a particular perpetrator. It can be, and moreover, maybe several people behind this kind of bombing. It can be, for example, local Islamists. There are plenty of them, as you know, manipulated or not by an external power such as Iran or Russia or still another state. It's too confused for the moment to elaborate firm hypothesis.
I see. So what does this incident reveal about Europe's evolving role in the Middle East, particularly France's strategy, and could it reshape Western engagement in Syria?
What is much more sure is what the Europeans in general and France in particular are trying to do in Syria since more than a year. As you probably saw, and actually it joins the news you were sharing a few minutes ago, the Strait of Hormuz is not, alas, a safe place anymore. So powers are looking for alternative road, including pipelines from Kuwait and Iraq to Syria, to the port of Latakia. And who is in charge of the port of Latakia since last year? It's a French-owned company. And currently, Total Energy is in discussion with the Syrian authorities to build, or at least to participate to the building of pipelines, as I said, from Iraq and Kuwait to Syria. Because Saudi Arabia already has, since 45 years, a pipeline from its fields of hydrocarbons in the north to the Red Sea. So for Saudi Arabia, the problem is partly solved, but for Iraq and Kuwait, it is not solved at all. Besides the hydrocarbons, there are a lot of European, especially French, investment in Syria, in the bank sector, in digital infrastructure, in agriculture, and in tourism.
And on top of that, also within... Sorry, go ahead. Sorry, I don't want to cut you off. Go ahead.
And just to add something, because as we are on Azerbaijani TV, there is a strong coherence of this EU position with the Turkish one, because all agree on this fundamental fact: the current Syrian government must be consolidated as much as possible.
I see. And just on that, I guess, how might regional powers, including Turkey, Iran, Israel, and Gulf states, interpret these attacks, and what impact could they have on the evolving balance of power?
One more time, given the limited scope of this attack, I don't see them having a particular impact unless more attacks and more devastating attacks happen. So for the moment, it's just a bad signal, maybe sent to Mr. Macron, maybe for other reasons, but it's just a bad signal. It's more symbolic than anything else.
I see. So you think it's quite an isolated incident that will not be reoccurring. Well, in that sense, because obviously Macron decided to continue with his visit in Syria and get a number of things done, and he signed a number of deals in areas of aviation, health and trade. How important are these particular deals made between France and Syria? Why is Syria an important partner with France?
It's historical. We could go back until the Crusades, but modern Syria was created by France during the interwar. And for the more current events, it's fundamental for the stability of the region to end the refugees crisis, and as I discussed before, to have alternative road for hydrocarbons. So that's this geographical location is fundamental for Europe in general and for France in particular. Moreover, even if it's not a major market, it's a market because everything has to be rebuilt in Syria, and of course for the companies, it's interesting.
I see. Now, looking beyond Syria, what broader lessons does this incident offer about the challenges of a post-conflict state, rebuilding, counter-terrorism, and the limits of diplomatic engagement in fragile states? Is this something that, we see because of Syria coming out of its previous rule under Assad, or is it something that is now they're making themselves to be seen more westernized and having more diplomatic engagement and relations with a number of partners, whether or not it's the East or the West?
Yes, there is definitely a return of Syria in the international scene. Most of the major players are discussing with him, with more or less pleasure, of course. In Russia and Iran, they preferred the Assad regime, and by far. But for the Europeans, for the Americans, and others, it's much better to have the current government than the previous ones, and to have a unified Syria. Israel is a specific case, but I think sooner or later the Israeli government, or maybe the next Israeli government, will understand its own interests, in the sense that a major problem for Israel's security, it is still the case, even if it is weakened, is Hezbollah. And to continue to weaken Hezbollah, you need the Syrian authorities to block the supplies of weapons and ammunition from Iran to Lebanon. So it is the interest of Israel as well to have good relations with the current Syrian government.
Yes, no, that's really interesting, your insights there. Thank you so much for joining me, Mr. Maxim Guen, for your insights there. Take care. Now, the NATO gathering in Turkey enters its second day, with leaders expected to focus on Ukraine defense spending and talks between the US President Donald Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Now, let's take a look at what day one had to bring.
The first day of the NATO summit in Ankara was dominated by major defence announcements, as allies sought to demonstrate they are increasing military spending and strengthening Europe's security. Leaders unveiled arms agreements worth tens of billions of dollars and launched new projects aimed at improving the alliance's military capabilities, particularly against the growing threat from drones. Speaking at a defence industry forum, NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte announced the new Drone Edge initiative, saying allies will invest more than $40 billion over the next 5 years to expand drone technology and improve protection against aerial threats.
We are building robust counter-drone defenses to detect, identify and neutralize drones. That's how we protect our 1 billion people against a full range of drone threats. And today, we are launching the NATO Drone Edge initiative. Through this initiative, allies are investing over $40 billion in counter-drone capabilities over the next 5 years.
Ukraine remained high on the summit agenda. President Volodymyr Zelensky urged European partners to accelerate the development of their own anti-ballistic missile systems, warning that existing production cannot meet growing demand as Russia continues its missile attacks.
And I believe Europe urgently needs its own capability to produce anti-ballistic systems and the missiles they require. We all value the Patriot system. It's an excellent system, and there are others as well, but today's wars have shown that current Patriot production is not enough to meet the growing demand for protection against ballistic missiles. That is a fact.
US President Donald Trump also attended the opening day, saying he spoke with both Russian President Vladimir Putin and President Zelensky before the summit. He expressed hope that renewed diplomatic efforts could help bring an end to the war in Ukraine.
I think they both want to make a deal. It's too bad it took so long, but I think something's going to come out, and the president's also helping us with that. But I think there's something. I settled 8 wars, and I think we're going to be settling a 9th.
The summit now moves into its second day, when Trump and Zelensky are expected to meet on the sidelines. NATO leaders are also due to continue discussions on long-term support for Ukraine, higher defence spending and strengthening the alliance's military readiness.
Staying on the summit, another key moment in that was that the announcement to lift sanctions on Turkey after US President Donald Trump met President Recep Tayyip Erdogan on the sidelines. The sanctions were imposed in 2020 after Ankara purchased Russian S-400 air defense systems, leading to its removal from the F-35 fighter jet program. Trump also said a decision on a possible F-35 sale to Turkey would be made, with trade expected to feature in the talks. Speaking before the meeting, Trump explained why he believes the sanctions should be lifted.
We're going to be taking the sanctions off. Okay? I don't want him to waste his time answering that question, because we're working very closely with Marco Rubio, a very famous man, great Secretary of State, and with Scott Bessent, and with Pete and everybody else. We're going to be taking the sanctions off. It's time to do that. Okay? We don't want to sanction friends. It's very simple.
Now, the war in Ukraine is continuing, with more missile attacks launched by Russia, which has killed at least 22 people and exposed widening gaps in the country's air defences. Emergency crews continued searching through the rubble of residential high-rises in Kyiv, and Ukraine says the assault included hundreds of drones and dozens of missiles with ballistic missile, exposing growing shortages of US-made Patriot air defence interceptors. According to authorities, Kyiv has responded by targeting Russia's fuel supply routes occupied to Crimea. The International Olympic Committee has provisionally lifted its suspension of the Russian Olympic Committee on Tuesday. The move marks a significant step forward towards Russia's reintegration ahead of the Los Angeles 2028 Games.
Russia's athletes could soon be back in international competitions, including the Olympic qualifiers in Los Angeles in 2028. It's after the International Olympic Committee provisionally lifted the suspension of the Russian Olympic Committee. The ROC had been suspended since October 2023 after incorporating sports bodies from Russian-controlled regions of Ukraine. The IOC says that issue has now been resolved, but no decision has been made on whether Russia's flag, anthem or colours can be used at the Games. Restrictions on Russian state officials and on holding IOC events in Russia also remain in place. IOC President Kirsty Coventry says the decision is aimed at giving athletes a path back to the Olympics.
We wanted to ensure all athletes have the possibility to compete at the Olympic Games and not be held responsible for their government's actions. And I believe that this is what this decision speaks to. It allows for Russian athletes to take part in sport competitions, but we've also been very clear that we do not condone any violence and war around the world, and we will continue with that stance.
The IOC says international federations will decide how to move forward in their own competitions. Coventry said anti-doping safeguards will remain important before Russian athletes return to major events. However, Ukraine's foreign ministry criticised the decision, saying it sends a deeply concerning signal while Moscow continues its war. It called on governments hosting international sporting events and sports federations not to allow Russian state symbols at competitions.
You're watching Daybreak on A News. Now to a short break, and when I return, I'll be able to discuss some more of the stories, including the World Cup. Welcome back. You're watching Daybreak with me, Nadia Jani. Now let's head over to what's taking place due to the summit in Turkey, because US President Donald Trump has renewed his push for American control of Greenland, saying the Arctic island is vital to US security. His remarks at the NATO summit drew an immediate rejection from Denmark and reignited a long-running dispute within the alliance. A News correspondent Anita Sharma has more.
Welcome to This Day in Europe, where U.S. President Donald Trump once again puts Greenland at the center of transatlantic tensions. Speaking alongside Turkish President Erdogan at the NATO summit in Ankara, Trump said Greenland should, quote, be controlled by the United States, not by Denmark, arguing the island is critical to American national security due to its strategic location in the Arctic. He also claimed Denmark failed to invest enough in Greenland while Russia and China expand their presence in the region, and that this issue has harmed U.S. ties with NATO. The remarks were immediately rejected by Denmark's Prime Minister. Mette Frederiksen said Greenland is not for sale and there are no plans during the summit to discuss issues concerning the High North, the Arctic, or Greenland. The renewed dispute comes at an awkward moment for NATO. Denmark is one of the alliance's founding members, while Greenland hosts a U.S.-operated space base, an essential hub for missile warning, space surveillance, and Arctic defense. The dispute has persisted since Trump's return to office, with Washington holding regular talks with Danish and Greenlandic officials, but making little progress. As NATO leaders try to present a united front on defense spending in Russia, Trump's latest comments risk overshadowing that message by reopening one of the alliance's most sensitive sovereignty disputes. And with competition in the Arctic intensifying, Greenland's strategic importance is only growing, making this debate unlikely to disappear anytime soon. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
Now, there is some rare drone footage that we have for you from Mount Etna in Italy, which shows a lot of hot red lava appearing to pour into a deep summit opening near the northeast crater. Instead of running down the flanks, the lava appeared to fall back into a hole at the top, as if swallowed by the volcano itself. Local observers believe the activity was triggered when lava from one of Mount Etna's craters flowed into an underground volcanic channel, forcing magma and gases toward the surface. Mount Etna is Europe's largest and one of its most active volcanoes. Now let's just take a look at this amazing view. Gosh, okay, now we move over to the World Cup and overnight results, and it was a nail-biting round for some teams. But Argentina and Switzerland have reached the World Cup quarter-finals, and after the latest round of 16 matches. Now on the screen is going to show Argentina came up from behind to beat Egypt 3-2, while Switzerland advanced with a 4-3 penalty shootout win over Colombia after a goalless draw. Now the two sides will meet in the quarter-finals, and as I mentioned earlier, both of these matches were quite controversial, especially Argentina and Egypt, as Egypt feels that they were at a disadvantage. And I know it says Switzerland 0-0, but Switzerland was able to get through on penalties and is able to make it into the quarterfinals. Well, that's all the stories for this morning. Thank you so much for joining me. But make sure you stay tuned to A News throughout the course of the day, as we'll have a number of bulletins providing you with updates of what's going on around the world and regionally. And make sure that you stay tuned, because we also have updates from the NATO summit in Turkey. I'll be back on your screens tomorrow morning. Take care.